Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Lisaan-ul-Qur'an, Easier Than English, Lesson 6. We began our journey by taking a map of the Arabic language. Not only that, Alhamdulillah, we have also started taking a deeper look at one of the three parts of speech, an ism. We know that every ism in Arabic has four properties. And of course, they are definiteness, gender, number, and i'rab. Now, the subject of i'rab has already been introduced to you in lesson number 1, in which we looked at it, what it is, how it's used in the Arabic language. Inshallah, we're going to be discussing the subject of i'rab, as I mentioned, right throughout the course. But what's most important for us to make further progress is that we take a closer look how different categories of isms change their ending to reflect whether they're rafa, nasab, or jar. And this is called declension in Arabic. We're familiar with Muslimun, Musliman, and Muslimin. This is the standard way. We're going to look at the other ways now, inshallah ta'ala, the main categories of declension in this lesson. This will enable us to go into deeper studies in Arabic, inshallah, from lesson number 7, 8 onwards. So we're going to begin this lesson with a quick review of the subject of i'rab, and then we will look at how the main categories of isms decline.
اقرأ باسم ربك الذي خلق.
I'rab, a closer look. Before we look at declension in detail, let us take a quick overview of what we have learned about i'rab so far. We know that there are only three. Either it will be rafa, nasab, or jar. Again, just a reminder, I'm avoiding all the English terminology like nominative, accusative, and genitive, etc., etc. We're just going to simply use the Arabic terminology. Now, if you look at the first sentence I have got on the screen here, I have Muhammadun Rasulun, which means Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is a messenger. Now, in here, you can see very easily that we have two parts, subject and predicate. Both of them are in the rafa status. So both the subject and the predicate requires the ism to be in the rafa status. And for these, we reflect that by putting sound at the end. For example, Muhammadun Rasulun. You can see then both subject and predicate should be in the rafa status. Then in the second sentence, we have Ja'a Hamidun, which means Hamid came. Again, Hamid is the doer of the verb, and therefore it has to be in the rafa status. So you can see Hamidun here at the end. So we got three reasons in Arabic why an ism needs to be in the rafa status: subject, predicate of a nominal sentence, and of course the doer of a verb will also be in rafa status. So far as nasab is concerned, we've only got one category or one reason why it needs to be in the nasab, and that is the object. So here we have Nasara Hamidun Zaidan. Here it's very easy. I hope you can recognize the sentence and translate it. Hamid helped Zaid. So Zaid is the object and it has to be in the nasab status. And the last one we have Salamtu ala Hamidin. I gave salam to Hamid, and it has to be in the jar status. Why? Because it's coming after words like ala. So again, we have three examples here for you of rafa, nasab, and jar, where you can see the reasons for it to be in those three status. So as a summary, the subject of a sentence requires the ism. In order for it to play the role of the subject, it must be in the rafa status. In order for it to play the role of the predicate, it must be in the rafa status. In order for the noun or the ism to play the role of the doer of a verb, it must be in the rafa status. And in order for the ism to play the role of the object of a verb, it must be in the nasab status. And lastly, of course, in order for it to come after the word ala and similar words like it, it has to be in jar status. So this is what we've learned so far. How do we recognize them so far? Of course, we've seen mainly Muslimun, Musliman, Muslimin. Here, for example, we have Rasulun, Hamidun, again rafa, Zaidan, nasab, and Hamidin, jar. So this is the culmination of what we have learned so far. Of course, we've also looked at the duals and plurals. We look at the Muslim table for those. I'rab, the different ways of declension. You should be now very familiar with the Muslim table. You can produce 18 words from any list of words that I give you which conform to this table. Now here we have 18 boxes. We're going to fill them with the word Muslim. I'm sure you can do this instantly, inshallah. Muslimun, Musliman, Muslimin. And then we have Muslimani for the dual, Muslimaini, Muslimaini. And for the plural, we have Muslimuna, Muslimina, Muslimina. I hope this is easy for you. For the feminine, Muslimatun, Muslimatan, Muslimatin. And for the dual, muslimatani, muslimataini, muslimataini. And then for the plural feminine, muslimatun, muslimatin, muslimatin. Now from this table, I hope you can easily identify, does the first row of singulars conform to the pattern that we've learned for i'rab? Rafa, nasab, an, and in for jar. But the rest of the table does not conform to this standard. So we have, for example, here, of course, you should know, sound masculine plural. They don't end with and in. They end with una and ina and ina. And for the sound feminine plural, they end with atun, atin, atin. Again, completely different from and in. And then, of course, the dual, whether it's masculine or feminine, the ending is exactly the same. Ani, aini, aini. So we can call these non-standard or special cases because they're dealing with specific category like duals. All Arabic duals will always end in this way. All Arabic sound masculine plurals will always end in this way. All sound feminine plurals will also always end in this way. So in this table, I have listed all the current ones that we've gone through so far. Now we're going to look at the bottom ones first, and then we'll come back to the top, inshallah. So you notice at the bottom, I have the dual. I have my sound masculine plural, and I have the sound feminine plural. You will note again how they end. They're slightly different than the and in example, of course, we've been used to seeing so far. We've also learned huwa and all the pronouns, the 14 of them, huwa, huma, hum, hiya, huma, hunna, anta, antuma, antum, anti, antuma, antunna, ana, nahnu. You should be memorizing these by now. And they're a special case, and they're only used in the rafa status. So that's the overview of what we've had so far in terms of i'rab, the different categories. The main category, of course, is at the top. We have muslimun, musliman, muslimin, muslimatun, muslimatan, muslimatin, kutubun, kutuban, kutubin. So we have singulars and we have dual plurals, all confirmed to the majority, which is the 85%. Now I'm going to divide this simply, so make our study of the depth of Arabic easier for us, rather than going into all this terminology that's used. I'm going to call the ones in the bottom, highlighted in green, special cases. And I'm going to give you all the special cases, inshallah ta'ala, as we move forward in topic by topic, rather than giving a whole list of words, and it's not going to make much sense to you because we haven't studied the categories themselves. Whereas dual makes sense to you, plural makes sense to you because we went through it. So these I'm going to call special cases. We leave the special cases to one side because they're dealing with specific categories. Then I kept on mentioning the and in are the 85%. So in this lesson, we're going to look at what happens to the 15%. What are they? They are actually the main category. The 85% and the 15% make 100%. And we leave aside the specials because they're not the base forms of words. They're special words where you're adding things on. So these 100% ones will have special categories. We're going to look at them now, inshallah. And our focus in this lesson, of course, we've already done the 85% in many lessons. We're going to focus on the 15% and look at what they are and how they are subdivided into two groups. So this is the study, how different categories of isms decline in Arabic. And again, you've got an overview. Please note, we're going to leave the special to one side. So leaving aside the special types of words, but the general isms in Arabic, the scholars divide them into three main categories in terms of how they decline. The first group, we will call them munsarif in Arabic terminology. I'm going to translate as fully declining. The changes fully. Then we have the second group, ghayru munsarif, which I'm going to translate as partly declining. And then we have mabni, I'm going to call non-declining. Don't worry, we're going to go through this in detail, but let me briefly explain what they are. So the word Muhammad, for example, you already know, changes Muhammadun, Muhammadan, Muhammadin. So bulk of the isms in Arabic will decline this way. And by now, you know there are many categories of those. Then we have the non-declining, which is number 3, mabni. Now, non-declining is about 2% of the words. 2% of the words in the Arabic language, isms, do not change at all. So in the rafa, nasab and jar, there'll be hada, hada, hada. That remains, of course, the 13%, and they are partly declining. What do I mean by that? They don't have 3 different endings. They only have 2. So for example, you will see Ibrahimu, rafa, Ibrahima, nasab, Ibrahima, jar. And that is why they call partly declining. We're going to go through all 3 categories. We're going to spend a little bit time longer on number 2 because that is something completely new to you and you do need to take a grip of that. The fully declining munsarif. Alhamdulillah, you're familiar with this. We went through the main subject of this right from the beginning. I'm going to remind you of the few important points which are very obvious, have been often repeated. But again, repetition helps because I want you to make these as part of your knowledge base, the basic stuff that you should all know. So now we have the 3 different endings, which you can see, and these are fully declining. Why? Because in the 3 different i'rab, rafa, nasab, and jar, we have 3 different endings. Now, there's 2 things about these that you need to know, which are obvious. Number 1, they take tanween, and number 2, they have 3 different endings. Then this is why they're called fully declining. If you go back and look at the muslimatun, that also has tanween, but it does not decline 3 different ways. So it's not part of this category. That is what I mean by 2 things. One, it takes tanween. So we have hamidun, hamidan, hamidin, and it has 3 different endings. Whereas the muslimatun and muslimatin will not fall into this category. So again, there's special cases I've already mentioned. So again, some books confuse. They say all words with tanween will follow this pattern. No, that is not correct. This only the fully declining group will decline in this way. We will discover other words with tanween which tends to decline slightly differently. So please note 2 issues. Number 1, having tanween. Number 2, 3 different endings. An, in. Again, let's quickly go through the examples. Talibun, taliban, talibin. A student, female. Talibatun, talibatan, talibatin. Qalamun, pen. Qalaman, qalamin. And kutubun, kutuban, kutubin, books in plural. So these are examples. Of course, there are many because it's the 85%. It will be overwhelming majority of the isms that you're going to come across. Another important point I want you to remember, it's been labored many times, but let's do it one more time. If you can add al to the word with tanween, you cannot add it to a proper noun. So Hamid is a proper noun, like London. You don't say the London, so you can't say al-Hamidu, for example, in Arabic, of course. But the words like pen, books, whatever, you can make them definite by adding al. What happens when you add al? Tanween is removed. Very obvious point. Inshallah ta'ala, you can see that. And it is still rafa, nasab, and jar. So not only tanween, but u, a, e sound at the end for the fully declining words are also signs of i'rab. And you can see again another example here. Al-kutubu, al-kutuba, al-kutubi. Again, 3 different i'rab because I have added al in front. So declension, an, in with tanween with al, u, a, e. The other point about the fully declining words are the fact that they're in the nasab status, we always add an extra alif. Please have a look at the examples. I've been through this with you before. So you have, for example, just take one example from here. Qalamun, qalaman, qalamin. So I have alif here at the end of every single one with double fatha, meaning the nasab status, and there is always alif there. There are 2 exceptions where that does not happen. There are 2. Exception number 1 will be when the word ends with the round ta. Do you remember the round ta? We mentioned it many times. Ta marbuta. If a word ends with that and it is from the fully flexible category, it will not need an extra alif. Please note this. So we have jannatun, jannatan, jannatin. Ayatun, ayatan, ayatin. No alif. And of course, we have another example there. Shahwatun, and many words that you can come up. So if it has ta marbuta at the end and it belongs to the fully declining group, it will not require the extra alif in the nasab status. The second group where the extra alif is not required, this is new, I have not mentioned this before to you, is when you have a word ending with an alif followed by hamza. That's all I want you to remember. Don't worry about the terminology of them. In that case, we will not use the extra alif in the nasab status. So sama'un, sama'an, no alif required. Sama'in. Then we have ma'an, no alif required. Okay, jaza'an, no alif required. So these are the 2 exceptions. Exception 1 with ta marbuta, exception 2 with alif and hamza. Then you will not add the extra alif. Please remember this because it's very important that you add the alif where it is required. Just to avoid confusion, it is the alif followed by hamza. So you got an example here. Su'un, it ends with a hamza, right? But it will need an alif. Why? Because there is no alif before the hamza. So please note this very important point so you will not get confused. It is alif followed by hamza, not hamza on its own. It will be su'un, su'an, su'in. And then we'll have shay'un, shay'an, shay'in. So in both cases, I'm adding the extra alif. Why? Because it does not fall into the 2 exceptions. That's really all we need to remember about the fully declining. We've done other bits with it. We've used it in 3 different i'rabs. So I don't want to take your time by giving you more examples. This should suffice. Please note these points in your notes, inshallah, and that's all you need. Of course, the overwhelming majority of them will fall into this category, and you know how to make them rafa, nasab, and jar very easily by changing the endings. Partly declined, ghayru munsarif. On the screen, you have a list of words. Again, the first one I'm sure you recognize, Muhammadun. It belongs to the main group that I've already mentioned, the fully declining. So this is a munsarif word. So Muhammadun, Muhammadan, Muhammadin. I put it there as a reminder so you can distinguish from the next group, which is partly declining. Take a close look at Ibrahim. Now we have Ibrahimu, Ibrahima, Ibrahima. Then we have Zainab, Zainabu, Zainaba, Zainaba. Then we have Akbar, Akbaru, Akbara, Akbara. Then we have mosques, Masajidu, Masajida, Masajida. Please note, if you put tanween on any of those words, it will be incorrect in Arabic because they cannot take tanween. So this is the category of words which are called partly declining. They will never ever take tanween. Never. So never in the entire Arabic language you will find any of these words, and I'm going to go through the categories with you now. They will take tanween. You will never see them with tanween. So whenever you see an ism that does not have tanween, one of the reasons is that it belongs to this category. There are other reasons, we'll pick them up later, inshallah, but most likely it will be partly declining, ghayru munsarif. Why? Because it can never ever take tanween. The second important point about them, they will not take kasra in the jar status. So please take a closer look at all of them, and you will note in the jar status there is ma, ba, a, ra at the end, and da at the end. There is no e sound at all. And this is why, because they are partly declining. And of course, the obvious point which you can see from the screen, both the nasab and the jar will end with a fatha. Both the nasab and the jar will end with a fatha. Now, which categories of isms, because there are 13% of them, that's quite important for us to know, fall into, or what are the conditions for them to be this type, i.e. partly declining? This is a very complex discussion in Arabic grammar. Why? Because it involves learning a lot about categories and how the words are formed and their origin. We really don't need to know this at this stage. Even if I went through the categories with you now, you will not only be bored, but you will not be able to understand most of it because it doesn't make any sense to you at this stage. Inshallah, in the intermediate stage, we'll go through the categories in more detail. But for now, I'm going to give you a very simple method of sailing through what can be a very complex subject. So don't worry about what are the conditions that forces a word to be ghayru munsarif or partly declining. We don't need to know. We just need to have a rough idea which categories are in that field. So again, I'm going to give you an overview of that subject, inshallah, so we can go through this subject relatively easily. The most common category where you're likely to see the partly declining words are proper names. Proper names. Names of a person and a place, etc., etc. So let's go through the ones that you're most likely to come across in the Quran. Now, in the Quran, there are 25 prophets named. We have 25 prophets named in the Quran. Of course, we know there were many, but in the Quran, there are 25. Majority of the names of the prophets will be partly declining. Ghayru munsarif. I put some examples here, so please take a look. Again, Ayyubu, Ayyuba, Ayyuba. Ibrahimu, Ibrahima, Ibrahima. Adamu, Adama, Adama, and etc., etc., etc. So majority of the prophets' names will be partly declining. Ghayru munsarif. There are 6 prophets whose names are fully declining, munsarif, and they are Muhammad, Shu'aib, Salih, Nuh, Hud, and Lut. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon all the prophets of Allah. So these 6 are exceptions, and there are grammatical reasons why, and they are because the first 3 are considered to be names which are original in Arabic, and the last 3 are 3-letter words, the middle letter being sukun. So these are sub-rules we don't need to know. Just know that these 6 prophets, their names will be fully declining, Muhammadun, Muhammadan, Muhammadin, and the other prophet, bulk of them, majority of them will be partly. There will be some that don't change. I'll mention them towards the end of this session. So this is the first category most likely to come across is the names of the prophets. So little test for you, inshallah. Open up Surah Yusuf in the Quran and look at the number of times his name, alayhi salam, appears in the Quran and see that demonstrated. So you'll see Yusufu, Yusufa, Yusufa, but you'll never see Yusufi or Yusufun, of course, because these words cannot take tanween. Next category of proper names are names of angels. All the angels that are named in the Quran and Hadith, these are all partly declining. غير منصرف, that includes Jibrilu, Jibrila, Jibrila. And I've given you other examples here also. So all the angels' names you will come across will be exactly the same. Remember again, I repeat again and again for your benefit, no tanween and no kasra in the jar status. Other names that you're likely to come across which are non-Arabic in origin are also partly declining. غير منصرف. فرعون, فرعون, فرعون. Iblisu, Iblisa, Iblis, etc., etc., etc. Again, there are examples here for you. And anytime you come across a name that is not originally Arabic, male person's name will also decline in this way. They are غير منصرف. Most of the female Arabic names are also partly declining. They are غير منصرف. Again, example here. خديجة, خديجة, خديجة. فاطمة, فاطمة, فاطمة. Again, you can see no tanween and no kasra in the jar status. Again, I've given you Zainab and Maryam also, but these are the most common names you're likely to come across in your initial studies. Any male person's name that ends with the round ta, the one we've been mentioning so far, ta marbuta, this is also part of the partly flexible غير منصرف. Again, you see many examples here. There are many others. We're not going to be studying hadith at the initial stages, so we're not going to come across a lot of names. But just for your information, you can make a note of that. Like Hamzatu, Hamzata, Hamzata. Again, no tanween and no kasra in the jar status. Any names of male persons that ends with an at the end. Alif with a noon. So for example, we have here Uthmanu, Uthmana, Uthmana. Again, no tanween and no kasra in the jar status. You've got some other examples also there. Salmanu, Salmana, Salmana. Imranu, Imrana, Imrana. Again, note that they're also in this ending will also be partly declining. Names of places, proper names. So we have London, Londonu, Londona, Londona. Misru, Misra, Misra. This is mentioned in the Quran, of course. Makkatu, Makkata, Makkata. Yathribu, Yathriba, Yathriba. Now, Yathrib was the name of the place, Medina, before the Prophet ﷺ went there. Then it became, of course, the city of the Prophet ﷺ. Next is a very important pattern of Arabic words. And Arabic words, as I mentioned right at the mapping stage, conform to patterns. And this pattern is very, very important. This pattern conforms to certain types of words. One of them means superlative. What do I mean by superlative? If I say big, bigger, biggest, this is how we do them in English. Small, smaller, smallest. Tall, taller, tallest. So these are superlative words. These conform to one pattern, and this is af'alu. So the word kabir means big, akbar means bigger. So any word that conforms to this pattern of af'alu, like akbaru, will also be ghayru munsarif, meaning partly declining. So akbaru, akbara, akbara, bigger or greater. Asgharu, asghara, asghara, again small or smaller. It also includes names of persons like Ahmadu, Ahmad, Ahmada, Ahmada, and includes colors, Ahmaru, Ahmara, Ahmara. So colors are also partly declining. And in Arabic, colors are like adjectives. So you have masculine colors and you have feminine colors. Same color with two words, one masculine, one feminine, because they're like adjectives. They have to have a masculine, feminine version. So this is dealing with color category. And of course, also defects as well. And deaf, dumb, and blind, that kind of words are also conforming to this pattern. So just please note this pattern, akbaru. So if you want to think of a simple way of remembering it, any word that rhymes with the word akbaru tends to be also partly declining, غير منصرف. Then we have also another very important pattern. These are adjective patterns, and they conform to this pattern of fa'alanu. Now look at the examples here. We have quite a few. Atshanu, jaw'anu, ghadbanu, kaslanu. So last one we'll take. Kaslanu, kaslana, kaslana. Lazy. May Allah protect us from being lazy. So lazy is a adjective, and that word is also partly declining. Why? Because it conforms to this pattern of words. So in Arabic, patterns of words tells us lots of information. One of the information I'm sharing with you now, that it will be in the 13% category. The last is a long list, and I'm not going to give you the whole list because it's going to just make the lesson too long. But I just want you to note, remember we've had broken plurals before, and I mentioned that we're going to do it piece by piece because it's a very lengthy discussion on broken plurals. Now, broken plurals in Arabic conform to many different patterns. We've already seen some patterns like kutubun, kutuban, kutubin. That's fully declining. But there are patterns in broken plurals, quite a few of them, that are partly declining. And these are, one example here I've got for you, asdiqa'u, conforms to the pattern of af'ila'u. So this pattern will be also partly declining. So you have as an example the names of, for example, prophets, anbiya'u, anbiya'a, anbiya'a. Nabiyun is a singular, anbiya'u, anbiya'a, anbiya'a, which is prophets, conforms to this pattern. Remember also I mentioned there are multiple plurals of certain words. Well, nabi can be nabiyuna, nabiyina, just like the muslimuna, muslimina, and also conforms to a broken plural pattern. Then we have the other pattern, fu'ala'u. So ulama'u, scholars. Alimuna, alimina can be there also, but this is also a broken plural. Ulama'u, ulama'a, ulama'a. Then for fuqara'u, fuqara'a, fuqara'a. Many examples of words that conform to these patterns. Many you'll come across, inshallah. Okay, and then you have mafa'ilu, masajidu. We've already seen mosques. Masajida, masajida. Why is it falling into the partly group? Because it belongs to this pattern and it has to be partly flexible. Madarisu, madarisa, madarisa. And lastly, we have mafatihu, mafatiha, mafatiha. Again, there are many other keys, the plural of keys that you come across. So I have an idea. The number of patterns of broken plurals will also be partly declining, i.e. they will never take tanween and they will not take a kasra in the jar status. Adding al to partly flexible ghayru munsarif words. Now, partly flexible words mainly come from the category of proper nouns. You cannot add al to a proper noun, obviously. We've been through this point many times. You cannot say al-Ibrahimu. It doesn't make any sense, okay? Like in English, you don't say the London, the John, the Peter. You don't do that in English language also. But there are words, of course, which can have al added to them. One example is akbar. Akbar means greater. If I want to say the greatest, I will say al-Akbaru, al-Akbaru. Now, when you add al to a word that originally is ghayru munsarif, partly declining, what happens? We have al-Akbaru, which is rafa, al-Akbara, which is nasab, then we have al-Akbari. It takes a kasra. Why? The reason is very simple. When you add al to a word that is ghayru munsarif, it is no longer ghayru munsarif. It moves into the fully flexible pattern. So if you can add al to it, then it can become fully declining. So it can take a kasra. So again, you can think of it as an exception, not really, because it is changing category because of the power of al. Al does quite a few things in Arabic language. One we've seen, it removes tanween. And now we can see another power of it, that it actually takes a word that is normally partly declining and moves it into the declining, fully declining category. We can also do that to the word mosque, the mosques, al-masajidu, al-masajida, al-masajidi. Again, it's taking a kasra. Why? Because it's taken an al and it's moved over to the fully declining category. Summary of partly declined. I've got a quick diagram here. I'm not going to go through it. It's just a simple diagram which you can take a picture of or save it as a screen save. And this will give you the main categories where we found the partly declining words, ghayru munsarif. And inshallah ta'ala, this will help you remember. You can just put an example under each one by hand, and this will help you, inshallah, remember the main categories that you're likely to come across, where you'll encounter those words that don't take tanween ever, and then don't take kasra in the jar status. So please make a note of this, inshallah, and I'm sure you'll find it very, very helpful. Let's summarize our discussion on partly declining words. Firstly, they never ever take tanween. You'll never see tanween on any word that is partly declining. Number two, they will not take kasra in the jar status. And third one, in the nasab and the jar status, they both end with fatha, which is the example. All you really need to remember is the word Ibrahim, Ibrahimu, Ibrahima, Ibrahima, in the order that I'm reading them out. Read the last two twice, and then inshallah this will reinforce rafa, nasab and jar in your mind. And of course, note that if I add al, if I can add al to the word, then it will move over to the fully declining words. And that's all you need to remember about the partly declining words. It's not a complex subject. Our aim really is to start using this. We don't need to know all the grammatical rules behind it. Inshallah, Allah grant us tawfiq. As we study more and more, we get into the more detailed Arabic grammar. We can go and find out the categories and so on. But we got to learn that first. So for now, use this because you're going to come across. And you're going to see tanween not being there. You're going to see a fatha in the jar status. Why? Because it belongs to that category. And this is the only bit of information that you need. Otherwise, the subject really is very, very useful and very, very required for you to further develop your Arabic studies. So let's put them in our standard 3 sentences that we've been using to illustrate Arab, and hopefully it will become very clear to you what happens in practice with these types of words. The first sentence I want to say is Muhammad came. Muhammad, remember, belongs to the main category, the fully declining words. Of course, here we're using them as common names. So, Ja'a Muhammadun, Ra'aytu Muhammadan, Sallamtu ala Muhammadin. Very simple. This is exactly what happens with the 85% fully declining words. So what happens with the word Ibrahim? Ibrahim came. Ja'a Ibrahimu. I saw Ibrahim. So it needs to be the object, has to be nasab. Ra'aytu Ibrahima. I gave salam to Ibrahim. So it's coming after a word like ala. What happens? Sallamtu ala Ibrahima. You can see here, it's got a fatha, but it's definitely in the jar status. Why? Because it's coming after words like ala. So these types of words, the ghayru munsarif, the partly declining, they end in 3 different stages. This way, how do you know whether it's nasab or jar? Very easily from the context. In the context, we know that it has to be object. In the third example, in the context, we know that it has to be the word coming after ala, so it has to be jar. And that's how we work it out, inshallah. Just in case you were confused, what happens? How do you know whether it's nasab or jar? Mabni, non-declining. Mabni means non-declining, meaning basically it does not change under any of the 3 different i'rab. So for example, hadha rafa, hadha nasab, hadha jar. Same thing with tilka rafa, tilka nasab, tilka jar. Now there are several different categories of isms that fall into the mabni. The first one are pointing words, meaning the words that we use to point to something. This, that, these, those types of words in Arabic are all mabni. Please note, except for the dual. The dual will be exactly the same as the duals we've learned. Inshallah, we're going to study this subject in more detail when we discuss the subject of one of the structures in Arabic that we need to learn called murakkab ishari, which is the pointing structure or pointing phrase. But for now, note that the singular and the plural will be mabni. They will not change. So, hadha, haulai, ulaika, these types of words are fixed. They're mabni. Their endings do not change. The second category which falls into this are the words like alladhi, alladhina, those types of words. They're also mabni. They do not change. And again, I mentioned this in the discussion under definiteness, which I think was in lesson number 2. So these are words we're going to learn later, inshallah, full lesson on them. Again, note the duals will change. The duals will change exactly like all the other duals, but the singular and the plural, for example, alladhi, 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 alladhina, 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 and the rafa, nasab, and jar. So these words do not change. Next, we have most of the words that are used to ask questions. For example, ma, man, lima, kam, kaifa. Don't worry, we're going to discuss them in detail under the section, but please note that they are fixed, i.e. they will not change. They're mabni, they're non-declining. So man, man, man in all the 3 different statuses. Ma, 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 lima, 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 etc., etc. Next are adverbs. Some of them, not all, are also mabni, non-changing. For example, we have one here, haythu, haythu, haythu. Idha, idha, idha. Again, you'll come across idha many times. It's used quite extensively in the Quran. It will not change its ending in the all 3 different i'rab, rafa, nasab, and jar. Next category, broken plurals. Now, we've seen broken plurals in the fully declining. Remember, kutubun, kutuban, kutubin. We've seen them also in the partly declining, masajidu, masajida, masajida, mosques. Now we see them also in the non-declining. Some of the words which are broken plurals do not really change their ending. So we're going to put them into this category. Though strictly they don't fall here. For example, marda, sick persons in plural. Marda, marda. So these are broken plurals. They'll also be treated in the Arabic language as if they are mabni in these circumstances. They will not change. In all the 3 circumstances, their ending will not change. Please note, of course, at the end of it, we have the alif maksura, which is the alif that is written like a ya, but is actually alif. Also, there are some nouns which are also falling into this category, which will not change in the 3 different i'rab. Now in here we have words like Aqsa, Adna, and names like Musa, Isa, Yahya, the word like dunya, meaning world, they will not also change. So they belong to the mabni category. So remember the names of the prophets, overwhelming majority of them will be partly declining, ghayru munsarif. 6 of them are fully, so they're munsarif, and then we have now some of them which are also mabni. They will not change for all intents and purposes for our practice. We have Musa, Musa, Musa. Now this is not really complex, just an idea for you to know that certain words in Arabic will not change their ending and they're called mabni. So in all these 3 i'rab, they will be exactly the same. Of course, the question might come to your mind, how do I know? Context is the king. From context, we'll know inshallah ta'ala as we go through. So please note the final category, mabni. These are just a brief outline for you, and as and when they're relevant, I will bring them more in detail. I just wanted this lesson to be a reference point for you, so you have an overview of the subject. The 3 sentences we've used to illustrate i'rab right from the beginning, we'll use them again here just to reinforce the idea of what is going on as far as the 3 different ways of declension is concerned. The first word we have is Muhammad, which is of course is fully declining. So we have Ja'a Muhammadun, Ra'aytu Muhammadan, Sallamtu ala Muhammadin. But the second group we have, which is partly declining, ghayru munsarif, and there are example here with Ibrahim, Ja'a Ibrahimu, Ra'aytu Ibrahima, Sallamtu ala Ibrahima. And lastly, we have example with Musa. So we want to say Musa came. I will say Ja'a Musa, I saw Musa. Ra'aytu Musa, I gave salam to Musa. Sallamtu ala Musa. Again, you can see there is no change at all at the end. How do you know? What are the statuses? Well, in this example, we will know through the context. So in the first one, it is the doer. In the second one, it is the object. In the third one, it is coming after words like ala. So this is mabni. Mabni words do not change their ending in the 3 different i'rabs, as you can clearly see from the example on the screen. Summary of declension. So brothers and sisters, for you as a final reminder, there are 3 main categories of declension. Fully, example, Muhammadun, Muhammadan, Muhammadin. In Arabic, it is called munsarif. Then we have partly, ghayru munsarif, Ibrahimu, Ibrahima, Ibrahima. And then we have mabni, which is non-declining, hadha, hadha, hadha. So again, just as a reminder, overwhelming majority of them will be fully, about 2% will be non-changing, and 13% will be partly declining. And that's really what you're going to be coming across in your study. Take a close look at this table. Here I've summarized for you all the different areas or different types of declension we've seen so far in our studies. Again, I remind you at the bottom we have our dual, the sound masculine plural, and the sound feminine plural. Now these are, I'm calling them special cases along with pronouns because they're set for a particular category. And we'll be adding to this list as we go through, inshallah ta'ala, more and more deeper into the language. As far as the main categories of concern, declension is munsarif, which is your main one, 85% fully declining. We have example, kutubun, kutuban, kutubin, for example. And then we have the partly declining, which is about 13% of the words. We're going to use the word Ibrahim there as our example, Ibrahimu, Ibrahima, Ibrahima. And then the non-declining are very small categories. They're about 2% of the words, hadihi, hadihi, hadihi. So I hope, inshallah, this will avoid many of the confusions when it comes to studying i'rab. A lot of people are confused when they come to i'rab, and this is where they give up. Because there are many things for that, because they deal with it piecemeal rather than approaching in this structured way. And i'rab is absolutely critical. One area, though, I must confess that I found it confusing. When I first started studying Arabic, I was told that Dhamma meant Rafa, Nasab meant Fatha, and Kasra meant Jar. Now, if you learned that and you started your journey that way, though it could be argued technically that is correct, it's very confusing. Please have a look at the screen here. For example, I have here Hadihi. Hadihi has got a Kasra. Does it mean it's Jar? No, this is a fixed one. So in Rafa, Nasab, and Jar, it could be any 3. Or for example, here I have Kasra there. Does it mean it is Jar? No, this is Nasab or Jar. So you can't really be saying that the vowel signs are the indication of i'rab. Though again, technically somebody could argue, yes, it's an indicator, but doesn't necessarily mean if you see Dhamma, it means Rafa, or if you see Fatha, it means Nasab. As you can see, here we have Kasra in that one, It is not jar, for example. So we have to be very careful just to distinguish. The vowel signs are exactly the same as we do have in English. When I said pat, het, pot, put, etc., I'm using the vowel to move the sound around. That's what vowels do. Yes, they can be an indication of i'rab, but strictly speaking, they're not. So do not use vowel signs primarily as indication of i'rab. It is depending on the category of the isms. And it's very important that you approach it this way so you will avoid confusion. So every time you see kasra, you will not assume it is jar. Every time you see dhamma, you will not assume it is rafa. Or fatha, when you say assume it is nasab, because verbs have them also, and you'll get even more confused. So just remember, it's the categories, and alhamdulillah, the way I've laid it out for you, that is all you're going to need for what we have described so far. The other area of confusion there are so many terminologies used for these. Even in the English books written to study Arabic grammar, munsarif is fully declining is called triptote, then you got diptote, and so on. And the other terminology that are used, for example, mamnu min as-sarf, and so on. So please don't worry about terminology idea. Just fix in your head that there are three types primarily that we need to deal with. Ones that are fully, ones that are partly, ones that don't change. And that's the way to approach it. Which one they are, alhamdulillah, by now you'll start getting feeling of these. And as we go through, start using them, it will become alive. So it is only when you come to use them that the subject will become alive for you. So I hope, inshallah ta'ala, I've given you a good summary in this lesson. This is a very important lesson. I cannot emphasize it enough. So I request you humbly to take some notes of your own. A lot of people are asking, which book am I following? I'm not following any book. It's a collection of all my notes from the teachers that I've learned, and I really have reorganized it in a way. And I've seen this being tested on many students that I've taught personally, alhamdulillah, and they've seen a lot of benefit. So this is why I'm giving this in this way. I've just collected it. This will save you reading lots of books, making lots of notes yourself, because really, until you get to an intermediate level, you really shouldn't be worried about collecting books or collecting notes. That's not the purpose. The purpose is that you and I can understand Quran. So this is all you're going to need, in my humble opinion. Of course, any more, I will bring them out to you lesson by lesson. That's it, brothers and sisters. This lesson is really mainly theory. I hope, inshallah ta'ala, you have benefited from this lesson. I cannot emphasize again the importance of what I've shared with you. It will cause a lot of clarity for you as we go into deeper and deeper into Arabic. So just make some simple notes, inshallah ta'ala. Again, I thank you all for your feedback. Please promote this learning amongst your friends and your family. Share widely. I'm not sure how the systems work, but apparently the more people who subscribe, the more it's picked up on their search engines and so forth. So many people can benefit. The purpose behind the course really is to make it available to English-speaking world. Alhamdulillah, English is spoken widely throughout the world. So Muslims from all over the world can benefit. Whoever wants to learn Arabic to understand Quran, there is the people who are aiming for, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept it from us, and may Allah forgive our mistakes. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us to embrace the Quran, to read it, to understand it, to practice it, and to spread this message of peace to the rest of humanity. May Allah grant all of us tawfiq. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
الذي علم بالقلم